Starting with Chapter 5, we'll begin looking at the various types of markets. In this chapter, money markets. Money markets are debt markets, specifically debt with maturities of 1 year or less, CDs, Treasury bills. Money market instruments are typically low risk but low return. This is where firms and individuals park money until they need it or a better long-term investment comes up. There is a very active secondary market for most money market securities. With money market instruments, we'll look at 3 ways of quoting yields: discount yield, single payment yield, either of which can be converted to a bond equivalent yield for comparisons. Note that the bond equivalent yield is an APR. Remember APRs? Periodic rate times number of periods per year. We'll look at each of these in turn as they are similar but not the same. Starting with discount yield. T-bills and commercial paper are quoted as discount yields. Look closely at the formula. Discount yields use a 360-day year, where N is the number of days to maturity. The denominator is the face value, not the purchase price. For comparison with bond yields, we can convert a discount yield to a bond equivalent yield using the formula at the top of the slide. Note, the denominator is the discount or purchase price, and the formula uses a 365-day year. The bond equivalent yield can be converted to an equivalent annual rate, or an EAR, using the formula on the bottom of the slide. Again, notice the use of the 365-day year. The 2 differences with bond equivalent yield: the denominator is the purchase price rather than the face value. Calculation uses 365 rather than 360 days. And yes, you will have a formula sheet that clearly delineates these. The other way of quoting money market rates is single payment yield. This is used with negotiable CDs and Fed funds because they only make one interest payment at maturity. All 3 formulas are going to be shown on the slide. The first formula is the straightforward single payment yield equation. Note, the denominator is the discount or purchase price. The formula uses a 360-day year. To convert a single payment yield to a bond equivalent yield, the middle formula. Note the conversion from 365 and 360. Last but not least, you can convert a single payment yield directly to an EAR without going through the bond equivalent yield first. Again, note the use of 360 and 365. So here come the examples. In this case, we purchase a $1 million Treasury bill. It's currently selling at 98.5% of face value, or $985,000. Matures in 140 days. Discount yield first. Pay close attention to when the formula uses a purchase price, P sub 0, and when it uses face value, PF. And again, 360-day year. Discount yield, 3.857. Converting the yield to a bond equivalent yield uses the 365-day year. Bond equivalent yield, 3.97%. Finally, the conversion from bond equivalent to EAR. EAR, 4.019%. Don't miss the -1 at the end of this formula. Some more sample calculations. Given commercial paper, $1 million investment, 90-day maturity, 2% discount yield. Versus a $1 million CD, also 90 days, 2% single payment yield. They sound sort of the same. Which one's better? Looking at the commercial paper first, we need the purchase price, P sub 0, to find the bond equivalent yield for comparison. So we solve the discount yield equation for the price, $9.95. With the purchase price, we can find the bond equivalent yield, 2.038. For the CD, we need to use the single payment yield formula. We can convert directly to the bond equivalent yield, 2.0278. Commercial paper has the better yield, 2.038. So what's the EAR for the commercial paper? Using the formula, we find an EAR of 2.0537. Now that we've looked at all the ways money market yields are computed, let's look at the different instruments that fall under money market. All of these are short-term debt instruments: Treasury bills, Fed funds, repos, commercial paper, negotiable CDs, banker's acceptance. Not all of these will be familiar to you, but we'll go over each type. Treasury bills are easily the most well-known short-term debt instrument. Issued by the U.S. government, they're default-free and virtually inflation risk-free since they're short-term, and there is a very active secondary market, so they are very liquid. Treasury bills are the instruments the Fed buys and sells when implementing monetary policy. They're considered a safe haven internationally. During the financial crisis, not only did the supply of T-bills increase, but demand for treasuries as a safe haven investment soared. Demand increased for the first time ever. Yields on 3-month bills fell below zero. In essence, investors paid the U.S. government to take their money. The Fed sells T-bills through an auction process. 13-week and 26-week Treasury bills are offered weekly. Bids can be submitted by government dealers, corporations, and individuals. Bids are termed competitive or non-competitive. Competitive bids specify a price, which is a yield, and a quantity of T-bills as a dollar amount. Non-competitive bids get preferential treatment. They specify only an amount and pay the lowest price from the auction, and we'll look at the auction process on coming slides. This chart is meant to describe the T-bill auction process called a Dutch auction or a single price auction, but we're going to go through an example on the coming slides to show you how it works. To begin the auction, the Fed announces the dollar amount of T-bills being offered. In this example, the amount is $40 million. The 5 competitive bidders bid an amount in dollars and a yield. Note that a lower yield is a higher bid, sort of backwards from what you'd think a regular auction. The bidders are sorted high bid to low bid. Remember, the high bid is the lowest bid. Once the bidders are arranged in order, accumulate the dollar amounts top down until the amount offered is reached. In this case, we made it come out evenly with Compton's bid hitting the $40 million. If the total had not come out even, there would have been an allocation. Additionally, if there had been any non-competitive bids, they would have been subtracted from the $40 million at the start. Compton's bid is termed the stop-out yield or price. All winning bidders, competitive and non-competitive, pay the stop-out price. This is how it encourages higher bidding. The secondary market for U.S. Treasury bills is the largest of any U.S. money market instrument. It is extremely liquid. There are 21 primary dealers who make a market in T-bills. Making a market means they stand ready to buy or sell. They are the primary competitive bidders in the auction process, and they trade not only for their own account but for clients as well. There's no actual paper changing hands. Everything is book entry and handled through Fedwire. Remember, Treasury bills are sold on a discount basis. That means you pay less than face value, get no intermediate payments, and receive the face value at maturity. T-bill discount yields are quoted, so we can find the price using the formula on the slide. Note the 360-day year. You can achieve the same result by rearranging the bond equivalent yield to find the price. Note the 365-day year. Here's an example 5.5 from the text. The asked discount yield on a $10,000 T-bill is 0.328%. Bill has 171 days to maturity. Using the previous formula to find the price, we get $9,984.42. We get the same result rearranging the bond equivalent formula. Again, be careful of 360 and 365 and the use of the purchase price or the face value. Moving on to Fed funds, the target rate set by the FOMC in implementing monetary policy. These are primarily short-term, usually overnight loans. They're unsecured. These are the overnight loans bank to bank to meet reserve requirements. These are multi-million-dollar loans, and they are single payment loans. Now to repurchase agreements, or repos. A repo is appropriately named. It's the sale of a security with an agreement to buy it back at a set higher price in the future. These are widely used to enable Treasury traders to go home flat, selling out overnight and buying back the next morning. The difference in the sell and buy price is the interest. The repo rate is typically lower than the Fed funds rate because repos are collateralized loans. All funds transfers are handled via Fedwire. If risky securities are pledged as collateral, the fund's lender may require a larger haircut. Repos normally have to be slightly over-collateralized. For instance, to borrow $100, the repo seller would have to sell the securities currently worth $102 for a $2 haircut. Repurchase agreements are typically very large, 10 to 25 million. There is such a thing as a reverse repo, a purchase with an agreement to sell it in the future. The yield on repos is a single payment yield. Uses a 360-day year. The denominator is the purchase price. Note that the single payment formula subscript is denoted as repo. Example 5.7. A bank enters a repo agreement to buy Fed funds at $10 million. They promise to sell them back at a price of $10,291.67 after 5 days. To find the single price yield, we use the equation shown on the slide and find a yield of 0.21%. Commercial paper is not something most of us are familiar with. CPs are unsecured short-term corporate debt. Denominations are generally $100,000 to $1 million, and the maturities run up to 270 days, just short of having to register with the SEC. Commercial paper is sold indirectly through brokers and dealers. There is virtually no secondary market, so most of them are held to maturity, and the yields are quoted on a discount basis, like T-bills. There is a form of commercial paper that is collateralized. It's called asset-backed commercial paper. The market grew rapidly prior to the financial crisis, but much was backed by mortgage-backed securities, and it pretty much collapsed. Example 5.8, commercial paper. An investor buys a 95-day commercial paper with a par or face value of $1 million. Purchase price, $990.23. Using the discount formula, filling in the given data, we find a discount yield of 0.3702. Using the formula to convert to a bond equivalent yield, we find a bond equivalent yield of 0.3757. Finally, converting to an EAR, we find an EAR of 0.3763. Moving on to negotiable CDs. These are bank-issued time deposits that specify both an interest rate and a maturity date. These are bearer instruments, which means whoever has possession can cash them in. They can be sold in the secondary market. Typical denominations, $100,000 to $10 million. They are often purchased by money market mutual funds using pooled funds from individual investors. Finally, our last money market instrument, banker's acceptance. Like commercial paper, these are not instruments most of us are familiar with since they're primarily used in international trade. Exporters prefer that a bank acts as a payment guarantor before sending the goods. Like negotiable CDs, these are bearer instruments and saleable in the secondary market. The next slide explains how they work. Purchase order is sent by U.S. buyer to the Chinese seller. Chinese seller requests a letter of credit, notification of the letter of credit, and draft authorization. The order is shipped. Time draft and shipping paper is sent to the Chinese seller's bank. Time draft and shipping paper is sent to the U.S. bank. Banker's acceptance created. Payment sent to foreign bank immediately if Chinese seller wishes to discount the draft and collect immediately, at maturity if not. Payment sent to the Chinese seller. Payment to U.S. bank by U.S. buyer at maturity, paid in full. Shipping papers delivered. The U.S. Treasury and the Fed are the primary participants in money markets, though money market instruments are available to all of us. The table on the next slide outlines by type of instrument who the main players are. Treasury bills are obviously issued by the U.S. Treasury, but virtually all levels of investors buy T-bills. Fed funds are issued by and bought by commercial banks. Repos are issued by the Federal Reserve as well as commercial banks and other financial participants. Buyers include the issuer group as well as mutual funds and corporations. Commercial paper is not government issued. It's issued by commercial banks and corporations who are also buyers as well as mutual funds, corporations, and individuals. Negotiable CDs are issued by commercial banks and are available to brokers and dealers, mutual funds, corporations, and individuals. Finally, banker's acceptance are issued by commercial banks and used by the same as well as broker-dealers and corporations. Note that only T-bills, commercial paper, and negotiable CDs are available to individuals. The U.S. money market is the largest and most active in the world, but global money markets are growing. U.S. dollars held outside the U.S. comprise the Eurodollar market. The euro in the name has nothing to do with Europe or the euro currency. The dollars can be in an account anywhere outside the U.S. The rate paid on Eurodollar funds is the LIBOR, the London Interbank Offer Rate. Eurodollar CDs are U.S. dollar denominated. Euro commercial paper is issued in Europe and can be in U.S. dollars or in the local currency. The London Interbank Offer Rate, the LIBOR, is set in London and is the rate charged on interbank loans in Great Britain. The LIBOR is also the base rate on a wide variety of loans and derivatives worldwide. The LIBOR was set each morning by polling all London banks offering Eurodollar deposits for their rate. Top and bottom rates were discarded, and the resulting average was the LIBOR rate for the day. In 2012, An article in the Financial Times claimed that London banks had been manipulating the LIBOR since 1991. After extensive research, the claims were found to be true. Several large investment companies were heavily fined: UBS, Barclays, JP Morgan, and Deutsche Bank, among others. End result, control of the LIBOR was transferred to the Intercontinental Exchange. While these rates are now 4 years old, they do give some indication of the variance among countries. Continuing the chart from the previous slide, note the negative rates. This chart details the Eurocommercial paper market through 2016, a total of $509 billion. The market as of today, July 2020, is estimated at $1.2 trillion. As you can see, the majority is in U.S. dollars and euro currency-based paper. This breaks the $509 billion total by issuer, with the UK and other developed countries leading. The U.S. is not a big issuer of Eurocommercial paper. Foreign investment in U.S. money market securities is heavily focused in Treasuries, bills, notes, and bonds, over 80% of the total market. And this ends Chapter 5.